I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Thank you so much, esteemed panelists, for joining us. Thank you, audience. Today, we are going to dive into AI, efficacy, and education. It's going to be a blast. Before I do, Sharon, can you put up the slides? Next slide. We at Edtech Insiders are so happy to have you here. There is a team behind Edtech Insiders. We have Sarah, who is our head of content. We have Sharon, who's emceeing today, running our behind stage brand partnerships and project manager, and Jen Lopaz, our operations lead. I'm Ben Cornell, co-founder of Edtech Insiders. You also know my colleague, Alex Sarlin, co-founder. We are so honored and humbled to support our community through these conversations. Next slide. I will let our speakers introduce themselves today, but we have Rebecca, Libby, Megan, Will, and Bibi. I can't think of a more esteemed group of thought leaders, deep thinkers, and mission-oriented educators who are going to help us answer all of our questions. And basically, at the end, we're going to have all the answers of AI and efficacy, right, team? But just kidding. We will also be asking the questions that are really keeping our panelists up at night too. Next slide. Edtech Insiders, there's so many ways that you can follow us. We have our weekly podcast, our weekly newsletter, we have these webinars, we have events. Please check us out on our Substack, our LinkedIn, and wherever you podcast or YouTube. We also have a membership program. It's called Edtech Insiders Plus. It's $10 a month or $15 a month, and it supports the work that we do here. Your membership makes all of this possible. And if you join, you get to be part of our WhatsApp group, which is an awesome place to digest everything post-show. Next slide. And last but not least, a plug to scan this QR code and give us feedback. We want to hear about how this webinar went, but also your ideas for future webinars. All right, without further ado, Sharon, you can take us off. I am excited to introduce our team. We are going to start off with our first question. It's really about the current landscape of education. For panelists, I'd love to hear your introduction, and also in a brief moment, what was the moment you realized AI was going to force us to rethink how we define efficacy in education? What was that aha moment for you? I'm going to go ahead and start with Megan.
Great. So thank you so much for having me. Really a pleasure to be part of this conversation with this amazing group. So as Ben nicely introduced, I'm Megan McCormick. I'm the Senior Research and Impact Officer at the Edtech Family Foundation. Edtech is a venture-based philanthropy located in New York. We're a national funder of programs, but also research in education from pre-K through grade 9. We focus on really trying to help scale what works to support kids learning at scale on a kind of nationally and for key groups to promote better, more equitable outcomes for kids. And my role is really about ensuring that we're leading research and evidence building efforts that ensure that the things that we are scaling truly work. For me, the moment it really clicked that AI was going to force us to rethink this efficacy question was when we started funding Stanford's Scale Gen AI Hub. So at the time, they had only identified a couple of studies that were really using Gen AI to support teaching and learning. And all of a sudden, every day, we were seeing 3, 4, 5 studies updated and added, all with different findings. And so we were really we were looking at the real life kind of R&D happening in AI in this space and understanding that these aren't static ed tech tools. They're actually constantly changing. And so really demonstrating, doing a traditional efficacy study where you're like, check that box, finished, evidence-based product, that's really not like, we can't do that anymore. So we need a better playbook for R&D. We need a more continuous improvement model to ensure that these products that are constantly changing are continuing to help kids thrive and at a minimum aren't undermining teaching and learning.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Megan. Let's go with Libby.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, great to be here and just super excited to have so many sign-ups to this session. It's just awesome that this topic's of interest to so many folks. So So yeah, I'm Libby, dialing in from the UK. So great to see some fellow Brits on the call. And I'm the CEO and co-founder of Edtechnical. And Edtechnical exists to really close the gap between our hopes and some of the promises that are being made about AI at the moment, between that and what actually works in education. And we're doing that through doing our own research ourselves. So we have an amazing in-house research team, and then we're also actually using our insights from research to back promising AI edtech companies. So we really sit at the intersection of research and investing. And my perspective on this topic is one that's quite practical, versus academic. So how can we actually really help generate research that's helping folks, a lot of people on this call, to really answer some of the burning practical questions they've got about what AI can do and what it can't, that might be useful for education, and to support folks who are actually building products to do that in a way that aligns with the impact that they really want their product to have. And so my take on this, so I think the kind of I've seen data points over the last sort of couple of years, and I think for me the data that's showing the kind of shrinking pace between model releases and big jumps in like AI model capabilities, for me just like really struck home, like, hey, if we're looking at like 5 to 7 months now for a big jump in AI capabilities, 2 to 3 years for a traditional kind of randomized control trial or academic study just isn't really going to cut it anymore. We really need to make sure that we're doing research in a way that's actually testing stuff as it's coming out and helping to give people the data and insights they need to make good calls about which models to use to build products, which products to buy for their schools and their classrooms. So that kind of shrinking timeline for me is one that really creates some urgency around making sure that research is kind of quick and relevant for the pace of change we're seeing right now.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Libby. I'll pass it to you, Rebecca.
Sure. Thanks, Ben. Thank you for having me. It's always fun to be on with you. And it's great to be on with fellow colleagues that I admire very much. So I think well, quickly, who am I? I direct the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution, where I'm a senior fellow. And working at Brookings is kind of like being at a university with no students. And you do research and convert that research into sort of practical tools and guidance and a lot of backdoor advising of anybody in the ecosystems, but particularly decision makers in government and out. So it's, your students are kind of practitioners and policymakers, perhaps, is how I think of it. And we work around the globe across 30 countries. We have a team in DC where Brookings is headquartered, but across uh, we work in 70 countries with a team in 30 countries, I should say. And we're really focused on the vision of making sure education is focused on human development and creates lifelong learners. That is really our sort of North Star. And I recently led the Brookings Task Force on AI in Education, really just looking at, generative AI and students. Are we on the right track, risks and benefits? And in that process, I would say there was sort of a twofold two moments for me that really stand out in this in your question, Ben, about what was the moment where you're like, ooh, we need to rethink. The first was, like everybody else in the world, the launch of ChatGPT and how quickly it got so good. So probably a couple months in, and I would just remember, I have two teen boys at home and taking their essay prompts from their assignments and putting them into ChatGPT and seeing what they produced, which was pretty quickly. It got pretty good, and thinking, in terms of education, which also impacts ed tech and solving education problems, we are going to have to shift away from, this sort of transactional nature that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of education systems have at their spine, not intentionally, just out of historical circumstance, where it's sort of, complete this, complete this, complete this, complete this, and you know, cash that in for promotion to the next grade or graduation. So to much more learning process. So that was one. And then the second one was in the midst of doing the research for the AI task force. we really found that there was a range of, good ideas, perhaps efficacious tools that were being deployed here or there. Again, we did lots of bottom-up research and looked at studies that were undermining teacher-student trust. And I thought, we really need to take a bigger look. We don't just want a really effective feedback tool, but if students are interpreting that as lack of care from teachers, like that's not great. So that's where I think those two moments really impacted me recently.
We're going to dive into all of that here. This is just like, there's so many threads I want to pull on what you were talking about. I'm very excited to dive in. Bibi, tell us a little bit about yourself and also what was your aha moment?
Thanks, Ben. Really excited to be here. So I'm Bibi. I am Chief Impact Officer at ED, and I have a PhD in behavioral science and public policy. And I've actually been spending the last decade or so running randomized controlled trials on what actually works in education. A little bit about ED. So we are an Edtech research lab. And at our core, we've built several different types of products, but we at our core have a diagnostic engine that identifies in real time what students get wrong in maths and exactly why they get the question wrong. And that's the specific misconception behind the error. So we're all about misconceptions. And so what we do at ED Labs is we build evidence first, and only then we build and scale our products. And we just received 2 gold certificates from Edgy Evidence on efficacy and effectiveness. So efficacy is really close to my heart. And my role at ED is to build a global portfolio of research. So we have been running trials, field experiments on AI tutoring for just over a year now. And the moment that I realized that we really need to rethink efficacy and AI is very similar to what all the other panelists are talking about, is like the pace of change. In my case, it was very practical. We had been spending months and months recruiting schools, setting up the trial, writing trial protocol, getting teachers onboarded, all of the things that come with running RCTs. And we got the data in, we ran the trial for a couple of months. And then as soon as we got the data in, the actual model that we ran the trial with had been replaced by a newer version. So that is a real example of where you think like, okay, so we've just ran a massive trial. It was a huge amount of effort. And now we're going to have to use a new model. Are the findings even comparable? And how can we make sure that what we learned is applicable still to, the new model? So that was a big aha moment. But then at the same time, I think that at ED, we are building a constrained AI tutor around the model, right? So we can swap out models and test different models and their efficacy. So we're not only testing the model, we're testing the infrastructure around it. But really important work.
Yeah, so many great questions that are raised from that. Is like, is efficacy a point in time? Is efficacy a quality control process? Is it an outcome that you post and it is a business driver? I think it can be all of the above. And before we wrap with our opening question, I just want to thank Will and the 11 Lab team. They are our sponsors for the event today, and they think a lot about efficacy and impact across a number of sectors, but Will specializes in education. So Will, tell us a little bit about 11 Labs, and then also what was your aha moment around AI and efficacy?
Of course. Thank you so much for a great introduction, Ben, and super glad to be here. My name's Will. I lead higher education, go to market at 11 Labs, calling in from San Francisco. Great to see so many Bay Area folks on the call today. 11 Labs is an AI research and deployment company. We started off purely as an voice AI company. Most people know us for text-to-speech and voice cloning, but what we're increasingly focused on is conversational AI agents, AI that speaks, listens, responds, and can hold a real interaction. And in higher ed specifically, that means things like student support, tutoring, and enrollment. And my job there is working with institutions to figure out sort of where that fits and what it takes to actually get deployed. And my aha moment, I think, occurred first on my very first call in my role with a university president, where he had shared that we know the impact of AI is real. We just don't have the language to measure it yet. And since then, that's a line that I've heard over and over again. And I think it's really stuck with me because in education, we've always tied efficacy to things that we really know how to count, test scores, retention, credit completion. But AI is doing things that we don't necessarily have metrics for yet. And as many other people on the panel have already mentioned, in there lies a harder problem, which is by the time you design a study, run a pilot, and publish the findings, the capability that you've measured has already changed. And hopefully 11 Labs is responsible for that. And so standards can't stick around long enough to really become standardized. And so what I've seen and what's really emerging is this idea of, let's get it in the hands, see what works, and build a framework around it mentality. And so I'd be really excited to talk more about that today.
Thanks so much. Yeah, and these are big questions that you hit on. Many of our folks are dialing in with the backdrop of a kind of big existential questioning around AI and efficacy, and overall questioning around EdTech efficacy writ large. There's an anti-screen movement brewing for younger kids. There's questions around what have we wrought. The famous economist title is, we've had several decades of EdTech and it hasn't really moved the needle. And yet, at the same time, we have decades-long research. I have a comment from Richard Tibbles here around, what do we already know that was impractical before, but we can now automate with AI? So we have decades of research around what works, and now we have new tools that scale. So it really comes down to this question of what counts as evidence? What is efficacious practice? Is it also an indicator of inputs, of throughputs, of outputs, and over what time period? And I think for EdTech developers, we have questions. Also for consumers, school districts, I'm a former school board member. How do we as the consumers, as parents or schools, understand what's efficacious? So I'd love to start with Megan. You've thought about this at scale for a long time. Even, Overdeck predates, the ChatGPT AI moment. How are you thinking about what counts as evidence, especially given where we are in this fast-moving world of AI?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So at Overdeck Foundation, we are really trying to make investments in products, nonprofit organizations that are addressing like critical problems that we see in the education landscape. So we're trying to improve teacher quality. We're trying to make the teaching role more sustainable. We're also trying to just fundamentally support kids' literacy and math outcomes. And we also have early childhood focus on school readiness. So we're working across different developmental stages, and we're really trying to root our work in, as people noted in the chat, what we actually know from decades of research on like what can work. The problem that we fundamentally see isn't that we don't have enough tech tools. It's that it is actually quite challenging in the current education landscape with one teacher, 25 kids, to deliver the type of instruction that we know is impactful for learning. So the other work that we know from like high dosage tutoring that's really exciting and has an intersection with AI is giving us really clear, rigorous, replicated research that when kids get personalized instruction aligned with their specific core questions and needs on like a learning trajectory, we see significant gains, especially for little kids. And the promise of AI is that we could potentially leverage this technology to deliver on that promise for all kids, particularly in settings that are really under-resourced, like rural areas that don't have access to the types of learning supports that we see in other contexts. For us, when we're kind of assessing different organizations, I think that what is not a good indicator of efficacy is like a lot of hype and marketing claims. So it's really not that compelling to me if 97% of teachers like love this product. That's great. That's like an indicator of like usability and feasibility, and that you're seeing people liking your product. But that doesn't necessarily show us that it moves the needle on outcomes that we care about, school readiness, math and reading proficiency. And so what we're looking for is more careful evidence that the inputs of your product are deeply rooted in and trained in basic learning science. So I love the point that BB made about like misconceptions. My own 7-year-old son uses a math EdTech product that I think does have some innate AI capability right now, that when he gets something wrong, he told me it just says, oops, you got that wrong, try again later. And like there's literally no feedback loop as to what happened. And so we're looking for things that are like rooted in that deep understanding of how kids learn and teachers teach, Also, and seeing how the AI tool is like a mechanism for being able to deliver that approach to more kids at the right times. Another thing we really care about is not just like what the average impact or benefit is, but that we are truly seeing consistent gains across the board, especially for kids who have traditionally been underserved and are not proficient yet. That's not to say we're looking for like 1,000 child RCTs of AI products that like reduce the achievement gap. It's more that we want to make sure if we deploy an entire kind of like AI tool, we can have confidence that it's going to promote learning for the kids who need the support the most. And this is an area where I actually find smaller scale, really careful studies that have more rigorous designs much more compelling than larger initiatives that have less rigorous design or kind of like less ability to make causal inferences. I think AI efficacy research single case design is like it's a great application of a methodology where you can really like follow kids' individual learning trajectories with and without access to these tools and products. And so that's really what we're thinking about. We're trying to get like careful measures for things that we're considering that make a more credible case for this technology being able to deliver high quality teaching and learning, and be a mechanism for that on a broader scale.
Yeah, it's a great segue over to you, BB, because you mentioned misconception mapping, but one of your big wins recently was an RCT with Google. You talked a little bit about it, where we all know high dosage tutoring. There's ample evidence that that is really effective, but it's very, very hard to scale. So you ran an RCT with Google where you showed that AI-enabled tutoring performed essentially at par with human tutoring when human was in the loop in the appropriate way. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you found? I'll put the link here in the notes. But this, Megan, it's like what you talked about, something focused, a smaller study, but with rigorous research. And yet it's also, as the models are changing, how do we replicate it? How do we ensure it? I'm curious, BB, your thoughts, your lessons learned, et cetera. And I'll put the link in the notes for everyone.
Thanks, Ben. You summarized it better than I could have. So just to give a little bit of background, because not everyone will be familiar with Edie. We've built a platform called Edie School, which is used by lots of students globally. Students and teachers, it's freely accessible, and students can complete diagnostic questions. These are formative assessment questions, and we have on our platform real-time human tutors. So these are virtual tutors that a student can reach out to and ask questions, and they will engage in a two-way dialogue. And so we decided to run an RCT, a randomized controlled trial, comparing what it would look like if a student was talking with a human tutor one-on-one via our platform when they struggled with a question versus when they would be talking with the AI. The AI was supervised by a human though, so we had a very tight human in the loop design. So no message would ever reach the student before the human tutor reviewed it and accepted it. And that was because we ran it last year. This is when we weren't so confident yet in the quality of the LLMs in terms of maths output. We were really surprised. I will talk to you about some of the things that surprised us. From all of the messages that we supervised and that were sent out, we saw 0 safeguarding issues or severe errors. We found 5 messages out of over 3,200 conversations that had any form of error, and they were very small errors. So that was really encouraging. What was more encouraging even is that you already touched on that, is the students who were supervised by the AI or who were tutored by the AI with the human in the loop did even better on the next question in our quiz, in the formative assessment quiz, than students who had just been tutored by a human tutor. And that really surprised us because human tutoring is the gold standard. And we thought if it can do just as well as the human tutor, that would be a great outcome. But actually, it did better. And then we we're diving into the findings. We looked at all of the conversations and the metrics around the conversations. We found that students had longer conversations with the supervised AI than with the human, and the students wrote more and wrote longer messages. So there was more interaction, and we also did interviews with the tutors and found out that the AI, which was LearnLM by Google DeepMind, is so Socratic. It was extremely Socratic, sometimes too much so, but it would ask students lots of kind of metacognitive questions about how they were thinking about the question and their misconception. And actually the tutors told us that it helped them ask better questions too. Like, okay, this is your answer, but can you explain to me how you got to this answer? Whereas our human tutors on the platform are kind of, they want to help the student as quickly as possible, and they kind of, because they're expert maths teachers, they diagnose the misconception and try to resolve it as quickly as possible. Whereas the AI didn't do that diagnosis. It kind of went through the steps of asking the student. And that turned out to be quite a useful pedagogical experience for the student. At least that's our theory of change. So that's what we found. That was our most surprising finding, that that was better than just speaking to the human alone. And it was so much better than the static content that we have on the platform, which is just, we have static hints when students get questions wrong, and students don't really engage with those because people don't read text, right? It's so much more engaging to have an interactive dialogue. So we're going to be doing more studies, launching actually next week with about 1,500 students in an RCT, and we'll be testing different variations of AI-assisted tutors and see if we can replicate this finding.
I love that you're doing this work. Libby, you were previously at the Jacobs Foundation and now leading Edtechnical, and you invest specifically with impact and outcomes metrics as a part of your investment criteria. It's examples like these that get us excited in the field, but for investors, this is also so small and it can be hard to scale and replicate. How do investors think about efficacy? And, what does the future of efficacy look like in the investing space, given that the models are constantly changing, implementation is hard, et cetera, et cetera? I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, great question, Ben, and awesome to be following BB. Is ED is such leaders in the field for taking research really seriously. But I think if we given that ED is such exemplars here, if I was waiting for every company to have the same bank of research as ED before investing, then we'd have a very empty portfolio. But the way that I think about it is really as evidence as a journey, not as a single destination. So the type of rigorous work that BB's leading and the ED's doing is really, really valuable, super rigorous. But it might take companies a while to get there, right? Like starting off with the level of rigor that ED and BB are doing might not make sense for companies that are just getting started and are in their first few years and haven't got any revenue or just starting to get customers yet. So I think seeing evidence as a journey rather than just there's only one option is a really helpful way of thinking about it. And that can mean that companies might want to get started with something like putting down on paper, a theory about why they think their product's going to have the impact they want it to, based on learning science or other research sources. And then lots of steps before we get to some of the rigorous RCT work that others have been talking about on this call. So that's really how we think about it. So right sizing our evidence expectations to the stage and nature of the company rather than having like a one size fits all approach. We're also innovating ourselves on the research side. So trying to fill this gap that lots of folks have been talking about, including Megan, around, how can we come up with a methodology that gives us a necessary level of rigor as investors to have confidence to make a bet on a company, but is doing that in a way that's fast, rapid cycle, fast pace, and not expecting too much on the company side. So we've concocted this idea of research sprints, which is kind of taking some of the best from academic rigor, combining it with the pace of software development and generating data for us and companies to give us enough confidence that the product's on track for what it says it's going to do on the tin. So I think there's lots of opportunities, for other folks to be doing this type of innovative work on the research side to help people kind of answer some of these questions and make good decisions about which products to invest in and which ones to use. So yeah, excited to hear more about what other folks are working on in this space.
Yeah, I love your framing of it as a journey and as that there is a spectrum of pieces of evidence. On the buyer side, schools and districts, we're constantly looking for that evidence. And when we see three vendors, they all say, here's our efficacy claims. It's very hard to evaluate them. But one of the things we've consistently seen is that there's an engagement gap. Lawrence Holt writes about the 5% rule, where tools show efficacy when kids are really engaged. And so a lot of the work in the learning side of AI has been around how do we get engagement. 11 Labs, a lot of the use cases in our space are around how do we make for a more engaging product or personalize it to them or even create avatars of the teachers so that it's an extension of that experience. I'm curious, Will, you've got experience in go-to-market. How much are customers of AI products in education actually asking for the data and the efficacy? What are you seeing and how do you support people in that?
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. And I do want to prelude this by saying I think that's a spicier question than you think it is. And that's because honestly, I think efficacy data is really rarely what closes a deal. And I think it's very worth being direct about that in a room like this. And that's for sort of two primary reasons. First and foremost, I think that it is a problem that's solved. I think if you put this in the hands of students and learners, you will see the results immediately, and a little bit more on that later. But second is I think that it's structurally the last thing that moves a deal forward. In actual procurement conversations, the sequence almost always looks like this. You have compliance and IT security first. You really can't move forward without that. And then it's cost. Does budget fit? Is there a grant window? And then you go with urgency. Is there a chancellor mandate or an accreditation pressure, a deadline somebody's trying to hit? And then efficacy enters the conversation basically after all those three boxes are checked, and usually as a checkbox itself. The question I hear most often isn't like, can you share your methodology? It's, do you have case studies from schools like ours or organizations like ours where this is proven to be successful? And to be clear, like that's not me criticizing buyers. I think that's like very rational behavior under real constraints. Most institutions evaluating AI right now are probably looking at 5 vendors simultaneously with no standardized metrics to compare them against. And so oftentimes like no dedicated internal capacity to run a proper evaluation. So they really want to default to those trust signals. What peer institutions are using it? How did a demo feel? Could our IT team go live with an integration? But on that point, here's what I think is like probably the most interesting point from that. And that's that the institutions that we work with are starting to ask a lot sharper questions. And it's never because somebody has mandated a better evaluation of AI. They're doing it because they've put something that oftentimes they don't fully trust in front of students and administrators, and they got responses that they really didn't expect. And oftentimes were like beyond their wildest dreams. Like our work with Masterclass here is a great example, not because it's a direct parallel to accredited learning, but it reveals a lot about human behavior here. They added voice on top of an existing chat product, and 75% of their users mandated to it organically. Nobody said you have to do that. They just went and used it. The quality of the interaction oftentimes is what does the heavy lifting there. And so when the experience is genuinely better, adoption isn't a change management problem anymore. And so the question for higher ed is, whether we're building towards that or whether, procurement friction and compliance cycles are making it impossible to find out.
Yeah, you are totally right that this is a spicy question. We've had some great comments over there in the chat too. Rebecca, I feel like I know we have some pre-planned questions here, but I also, knowing you and knowing your work, like a big part of what you have called out in your study is that there are examples where AI is actually not called for. And I actually think some of the most important parts of your work is like, where is the efficacy already showing for pen and paper and books and non-AI tasks, and where could And really your report is actually, it's called a pre-mortem, which I love that framing, because it's not the definitive, we've determined this works and this doesn't work, but it's actually creating frameworks and tools for understanding where could this unlock. I'm curious, as you've heard this conversation from your esteemed colleagues here, where where do you see the potential, and where do you actually think we're going the wrong way with AI and we should stick with more traditional tools?
Yeah. Thanks, Ben. Well, just for folks who haven't seen the report, our basic headline, and we really were looking very objectively, what are the potential risks? Again, we bounded it generative AI, not predictive AI, and students, learning and development. Students throughout their whole life, students aren't little mini cognitive processing machines that turn on at 8 o'clock when they come to school. We were looking at students' learning and development, 24/7, that they live and breathe. And we basically found that yes, there are really good benefits from very, very uh, narrow AI use, a lot of sort of teacher use, adult intermediation, a lot of existing, I would say, ed tech companies, not big tech companies per se, who know about good pedagogy and have integrated AI into good pedagogy with vetted content. Again, can be very helpful for scaffolding reading and writing and, math instruction, and helping teachers save a lot of time and see where the learning, I mean, basically, Bibi talked about it, see where the learning journey has gone wrong, perhaps at larger scale than just what ED Labs does. So there's good ways, but it's very, very narrow use, is our takeaway of where we are today currently, and where, if we don't do anything, where we're headed. The problem is that there's a lot of wide AI use, what we would call wide AI use, which is a lot of student facing, unscaffolded, open-ended discussions with AI companions, chatbots, and everybody has sort of around the globe, I think, gotten on the bandwagon that, well, ooh, social media wasn't great. I mean, there's a lot of, elements of social media that are great. If you really want to learn about baking, you can go on YouTube and learn all about baking, right? But in general, social media has not been good for many reasons, because of its addiction, um, you know, comparisons in adolescence, if done in a poor way, are terrible for mental health, many reasons. Um, the issue is, and then people say, oh, but AI is different. No, kids are mainly accessing AI through social media to do their homework. Certainly, we heard that a lot in the US. It's different around the globe, but through AI companions, talking to them, taking pictures, do my homework, run it through an AI humanizer, turn it in. So that is highly problematic because it is undermining the learning capacity of young people. This is often out of school time, but it is also, many kids told us, yeah, I have my laptop and I have my like online worksheet here, and then I open up whatever AI, Gen AI chatbot it is, and I do it and I copy it. And there's even apps now to go from a Gen AI chatbot that you open up, and then you're typing in a Google Doc, and doesn't copy it all at once. It makes it look like your AI chatbot, answer is being typed in by you. Anyways, kids are really innovative and creative and always will be, is my takeaway. So we really do say that, at the moment, the risks, if we don't bend the arc, the risks overshadow the benefits, mainly because it's undermining kids' cognitive and social and emotional development, which they need to access the benefits in the classroom. And so for us, it's really, really a question of putting student learning and development first and foremost, and what are all the ways that we need to support them in a way, I'm just a real pragmatist, in a way that will work at scale, not just in a tiny trial. And you have to think about in school and out of school. You can't not think about it. So there's a lot. You opened up with the pushback on screen time. And I really think we want to make sure that we give kids really good AI, holistic AI literacy, teach them how the online world works. It's high time, and give them, the capacity to be able to create with these tools and be sophisticated in a few moments of time in the school day, that's essential. But I have a huge um, issue with sending laptops home and you're supposed to do all your homework online, that basically it's just a massive rabbit hole of distraction. And now AI, and how are we going to make sure kids are actually doing the thinking and learning processes? So, I do have my own little top list, Ben, if you want them, of what I think about in terms of efficacy for education technology. And I will,
You can't tease us with that and not share
yes,
some of
okay. So I think I really have kind of a big three in my mind. And again, my frame is system transformation, not a particular tool efficacy.
it. Understood.
Absolutely outcomes. And I'm not just looking at academic outcomes, I'm looking at the range of outcomes we know from child development and learning sciences kids need to have in a learning environment to succeed and thrive. So I think absolutely about math, reading, science, core academic sort of outcomes and skills. If I had to pick three, and we've been thinking about a phase 2 research project, and these are the three: academic learning outcomes, student agency. For me, it's really agentic engagement, agency pointed toward student learning. In my research on engagement in my book, The Disengaged Teen, we talk about explorer mode. So this real agency of going after your learning, do ed tech products foster that, or does it put kids in a real passive receivership mode? And trusting relationships. Those would be my top three. And again, not just short term. That's just academic. Like that's just student outcomes, number one, and not just short term. Hey, we use this AI tool, it's great. What happens, 3 months after? Can the kids transfer that knowledge? Do the kids retain it? A lot of initial studies have showed that, oh, the kids do great when they use the tool, and then when the tool's taken away, they do worse. So that's not helpful. We don't want that. The second is what we've talked a lot about here, the implementation efficacy. Can this product tool practically be scaled and used in a very practical way? I agree with Megan that net promoter score, like I love this tool, says a teacher or a principal or a student, on its own, it's not, I really don't care on its own how much kids love a tool. I want it to work and help them learn and grow. Uh, and I think net promoter score on its own can lead to sort of a lot of sort of fancy entertainment that is maybe distracting. But I think Net Promoter Score as an input into tracking efficacy of implementation is an input indicator for a company to be like, oh, teachers love it, administrators hate it. That's a useful input. And then the third would be cost effectiveness. This is what you brought up, and compared to not other ed tech tools, but to no tech. For example, I'm making this up, but it's probably exists, and I've seen stuff that I'm like, oh my gosh. If you are worried about kids' social emotional well-being, you could create an app where kids come in the classroom and do smiley emojis, sad emojis, and teachers get that. And then teachers are like, okay, I'm going to go send you a heart back or send you a message. Or a teacher could just stand up, walk over, give a kid a hug. It's a free resource. It's already in the classroom. You don't need to purchase anything, right? I'm kind of making that up, but I really think we need to look at that.
Yeah. And Rebecca, your points also raise questions about efficacy overall in education. We haven't necessarily always done a great job, even for non-AI things, really proving out the efficacy of curricula or of
Yeah.
programs. And
Transfer
I
is a
think,
huge issue without ed tech. It's,
yeah.
but we
And
want tech to solve ed problems. That's what we want.
that's right. Ed first. It's called Edtech for a reason. The ed comes first, the tech comes second. All right, we are going to do one more question. It's going to be popcorn with the panelists, so feel free to jump in. For those of you who are excited to get in on the conversation, there is a Q&A box in the dash, and if you have questions, put it in the Q&A box. Our team will queue up some of those, and we'll do a lightning round with questions with our panelists. You may have to click on the more button to get to the Q&A, just FYI for our audience. Okay, so Zooming all the way out, Rebecca, you mentioned some of these efficiency gains. And right now we're seeing AI as an efficiency tool showing some real traction. But from a learning standpoint, big questions. 5 years from now, will AI have improved the overall quality of learning or just improved efficiency? What's your bet? And feel free to qualify where you think it will
Yeah.
have improved and where will it not. Jump ball for the panelists, so feel free to jump in and feel free to add on to each other's comments.
I mean, I would say, sorry, Ben, were you directing that at me or were you asking?
No, it's for the whole group.
Okay, I'll let other people weigh in.
Cool, you're happy to kick off, Libby here. So I think, I don't think that, I mean, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think just because we have AI, like how we learn is suddenly magically different. So a lot of what we already know works in terms of learning, still applies. So the underlying like cognitive functions about how learning happens is still the same until we all have, Neuralink chips in our brain over the next few years. But I do think AI can really change what opportunities we have for supporting that learning process and for building products based on what works. So I do think that there are potentials in 5 years from now for AI to have improved the quality of learning if we're building on what works, based on what works, and building on those like long-standing learning science principles. I'm also going to say, Ben, and this is maybe like a bit of an unsexy view to have, but I'm someone that also does get pretty excited about efficiency gains in education, because I actually think there's a lot of traction there that we definitely haven't embedded and fully capitalized on. And I think, someone who used to work in schools, there's huge potential for like, lightening the teacher's load, and that can have really positive knock-on effects, elsewhere in schools. So just a little bit of a push to not get too negative about the potential for efficiency gains, because I think there's a lot we can achieve there.
Libby, I
Awesome. What
absolutely
others think?
love that take.
Yeah, let's hear it, Will. What's your thought?
I mean, my overall impact is that like quality and efficiency are only in tension because quality was previously unscalable, right? Like, for example, like I work with a medical education platform that is working to create conversational experiences for students, right? And now you can practice having a patient conversation at 11 p.m. on a Sunday as many times as you need with a voice that responds differently, like based off of your own emotional cues. And that's not just an efficiency story, that's an access story. And like access is a quality story. So, the binary there doesn't really make sense. And yes, it's not a sexy thing to say, but I think that there is real impact to giving students the freedom to ask hard questions, struggle out loud, and do that at times that they can't go into office hours, they can't be in front of a teacher. And so the quality improvements, yes, they can be conditional, but I really think there's a lot to look forward to in the next 5 years.
Great. What do others think?
I would just jump in because we have such an international group here. I actually think my comments, I realize, have been very US centric, but for the global community, I do see like a lot of opportunities for AI given just the scalability and some of the research that we've seen in low and middle income countries, really promising ways to help kids and teachers access resources and support learning on a much wider scale than before was possible. I think in the US, the context is going to be really like the outcome is going to be very much dependent on the need to demonstrate the potential value and impact given what we're seeing with this huge backlash against tech in schools, particularly for K-5. And so my one hope from that is that that is going to create broader incentives to build on what Will was talking about with the procurement to demonstrate that it's not just like everything's bad, and to really be able to provide nuanced information and detail about what can work under what conditions with what supports. And so I think I'm being lazy and not fully answering your prediction question, Ben, but I think I do have great optimism for the global community. And in the US, I think we just need to have some better procurement incentives to support those outcomes.
Great. BB or Rebecca, do you want to jump in
BB,
here before we go
BB, why
rapid
don't you
fire?
go? I'll go
Yeah,
after you.
I was going to echo your point, Rebecca, on wide versus narrow access to AI. I think that's going to really have if you ask about what is the world going to look like in 5 years, if we're going to go with wide access to AI and unconstrained access to AI, I think it's going to be very challenging for children to learn productively because learning is not efficient, right? Learning needs to feel like a struggle. If you're struggling, you're learning.
Yeah.
If it feels easy, you're not learning. So, although I do agree that we need to optimize for the teacher's time, I think we need to very much protect the student's struggle. And AI is brilliant at making everything feel simple, and that's also the danger of AI. So I think for teachers, if we can use AI to reduce administrative burden and help them spend more time on building relationship and teaching, that's amazing, and that could really help improve outcomes. If AI is deployed in a way that is constrained and only activates when it realizes a student is struggling in a very narrow way, like Rebecca was saying, I think it could also help learning. But we need to be opinionated and we need to push for that, because otherwise we will continue on this trajectory, which is just a Wild West and everyone uses it for everything.
Yeah, I second BB's second of my first or whatever. We're having a joint opinion here, BB. I mean, I feel like if we do nothing, the way I certainly am seeing it play out is a little bit by use case. If we just continue on our current trajectory, I think that back office AI use of workflow or bus schedules, calendaring, getting substitute teachers, like a huge amount of of really helpful efficiency gains is going to make the operations of running schools much better. And I think that is great. And I think that's just going to happen naturally because the tech is so powerful and so great. And I think it's probably the frontier, model, AI frontier model, the front, you know what, guys, I'm saying, frontier model AI labs that are probably going to be running that. And that I agree wholeheartedly is nothing to sniff at. Like it is hard to run schools. There are so many decisions being made. So I think that will go positive. In terms of teacher intermediated work, I think it could be good or it could be bad. I love the idea of teachers really being relieved on administrative um, burdens, but again, part of the core problem of ed tech as a sector is it looks very narrowly. It doesn't look at systems when things are deployed. And we certainly found that a number of teachers were really worried that if they told their school boards or principals of how much time they were saving, they would get double the load. So it only saves teachers time if the system maintains the workload. So, we have to be vigilant about that. The
Yeah.
other piece is, again, someone brought up before, there's a lot of not great ed tech out there because that is powered by generative AI because Gen AI is scooping up all sorts of things that is on the web. And a lot of the stuff on the web, certainly there's been research here, is, pretty didactic, compliance oriented type teaching. So there is a risk that if we sort of let it out and again don't quality control teachers, we might be entrenching more sort of compliance oriented old school teaching pedagogy, which is not what the promise of AI is. So, it's really about what we do there. And then the third, if we don't do much at the moment, I think we're going to have worse learning outcomes because of the out of school wide AI use. I think it's going to be social media all over again, but this time it's not just emotional well-being and mental health, it's going to be cognitive development, the ability to think independently and take feedback. Again, socialization of, being constantly developing social muscles that you have to be agreed with, which is where we're heading with AI friends and companions. And how the heck do you take feedback or learn? And mistakes is the core of learning and self-reflecting if you have developed children who are
Mhm.
expecting to be agreed with all the time. So again, that's doing nothing. I do not think that is foretold. I do not think that is the destination we will have to land in. I think we all have agency and we could totally bend the arc, but I think it's going to take a lot of effort from all of us.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm so hopeful for the future. I'm a natural optimist, but I think what we've hit on here is that both the research itself, the funding systems, the purchasing systems, and then the use cases all need to do better at incorporating evidence of efficacy. I have a bunch of great questions. We're getting low on time, but one really cool meta question that comes up. This is from, let's see, it is from Nina Huntman. Curious how the researchers are leveraging AI to do research on this. So behind the scenes, also AI is revolutionizing how we actually do efficacy research. Curious for panelists, just a sentence or two. How is it changing your workflow before we wrap up? Bibi.
Yeah, good question. I have started to use AI in the qualitative analysis. So we ran semi-structured interviews and used it for some parts of the thematic analysis. So like the early coding of all the transcripts, and then I went over them with like several human coders and recategorized some of it. But it was very interesting, and then get it to generate some themes, and then do some workshops and identify which themes we agreed with and which we didn't. I think it was like a sparring partner in that way. And there's a lot of research coming out of qualitative research methodology that is starting to look into this. It just helps me keep track of all of my meeting notes and all of the decisions that we make every single day when we design RCTs, and have a change log. I have my granola, which is an AI note taker, make note of every single change we make and put it onto Notion and make sure I don't forget it, which is so much easier to do now that I have AI.
I see a bunch of head nods from our panelists. Unfortunately, that wraps our time. This is the kind of thing where I feel like we could have a whole nother hour of just open discussion with the Q&A. For those who do want to continue the discussion, we have a bunch of events coming up next, or a week from Friday. We are going to be talking about screen time bans and what is the evidence and data behind that. And then at ASU GSV, we have a happy hour where we're bringing people together in San Diego on Monday. We hope to see you there. But before I go too far, I do want to just give a huge thank you to Bibi, to Libby, to Rebecca, to Megan, and Will. And thank you also to our sponsors. 11 Labs has sponsored this podcast, this webinar, but we also have Cooley, Tuck Advisors, and also Higher Education that have sponsored Edtech Insiders to produce this content. So thank you all so much for joining. Let's keep the conversation going as we see each other. And hopefully everyone who's listened is going to get some new ideas of how to incorporate AI evidence and efficacy in their work. Thank you all.